Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to today's SANCOLD YPF webinar. I'm your host, Ashley Kutsia, the SANCOLD YPF chairperson. It's great to have you all once again as we continue our mission on creating a platform for learning, sharing, and dialogue in the dam and water sector. Today's topic is both timely and important: sustainable water and food security in Lesotho. As we all know, water is not only at the heart of dam engineering, but also at the center of food production, livelihoods, and resilience in Southern Africa. We are fortunate to have with us Guy Robertson, who will lead us through this discussion. Guy is a water engineer and project manager at Pegasus Consulting, with extensive experience working on water and infrastructure projects across Southern Africa and beyond. He has a unique ability to bridge technical solutions with social and environmental needs, often working with governments, businesses, and communities to build partnerships that deliver real impact. Guy studied civil engineering at the University of Cape Town and completed his master's at Stellenbosch University. He is also a project management professional and has dedicated his career to developing solutions that improve water security, harness the role of nature in addressing environmental and social challenges, and ultimately help build a more resilient future. Guy, we're delighted to have you with us today, and we look forward to learning from your insights. To everyone attending, please remember that we'll have time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. And I would like you to take any time during the presentation to ask your questions in the chat or to raise your hand during that session. Your mics and videos have been disabled to minimize noise and will be disabled once you raise your hand. I also want you to note that the session is being recorded and will be made available after the event. So with that, I would like to hand over to our speaker. Guy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ashley, and thanks to everyone for joining. And I hope that you'll find this useful. And please do ask questions. I look forward to having some discussion on this topic and engaging a bit around it. I hope that you can all see the screen. I'm sure Ashley will tell me if you cannot. And yeah, as introduced, I'm going to be talking today about work that we've been doing in Lesotho around integrating sustainable food and water security for the country. We have taken a catchment level approach there, and I'll be talking about how we look at catchment level approaches to improving catchments for water security benefit, and how that also then couples with food security in this case and in others. And we've been working, so I work at Pegasus, as said. I'm in the Hilton office in the Midlands, and I also work within the Nature for Water facility, which I'll go into a little bit of detail on both, just to give you a brief background about what Pegasus does and what Nature for Water does as well. And we've been working with over the last 2 years with the Regeneration of Landscapes and Livelihoods project, which is a project funded by IFAD, who are a rural development group from the UN. And the project is in Lesotho, and it sits within the Lesotho Ministry of Environment and Forestry. And we've been working to support the ROLE project. So as the name suggests, ROLE stands for Regeneration of Landscapes and Livelihoods. The project had a landscape focus and tried to improve livelihoods, and there are a lot of people in Lesotho who rely on the landscape for their livelihood. And we are integrating a water security component into that work. The two are, of course, very much integrated, and we're looking to enhance and really activate the benefits that exist between the food, water, and livelihood nexus. Our work on the project, broadly speaking, focuses on the design of a fund for them. It's called the Regeneration Opportunities Fund, as well as doing a value proposition and business case development for the implementation of nature-based solutions. So we've looked at nature-based solutions, prioritizing them, implementing them, and then also exploring the feasibility of carbon revenue and generation of a carbon project as a means to support the activities of the ROLE project and also support the fund over the long term. So I'll go into a little bit briefly just about who Pegasus is. So we are a strategic management consulting firm, and we cover multiple disciplines. We effectively work within developing countries primarily, supporting development and supporting our clients in designing strategies, developing governance structures, establishing institutions, finding ways to finance infrastructure, finding ways to finance the management of natural resources, as well as providing technical expertise across quite a few of our sectors. We like to develop partnerships. We like to work as partners with our clients to improve the socio-economic conditions and to build resilience. And we like to do that in challenging and complex environments. And the developing world is indeed a challenging and complex environment to work in. So we work across 7 different sectors, as shown on the slides. And each of these has got specialist expertise that are held by our staff, both technical and non-technical, that sit within the group. And it's reinforced by cross-cutting expertise as well, such as sort of policy, business planning, business model development, financial strategy, transaction advisory services. So although we have these specialist areas and we have the specialists that sit within them, Pegasus really thrives where these sectors overlap. So we work, for example, to develop and plan resilient cities and do city and regional planning that is resilient. We look to undertake analyses of what future climate conditions might have and how they might impact on transport or energy infrastructure. And these then guide planning and interventions and adaptation. Pegasus was founded in 2000 by Guy Pegram, and it was founded to support in South Africa, to support African public sector institutions. So we began by helping them achieve their transformation and service delivery objectives. Pegasus was instrumental in the establishment of the catchment management agencies across the country. And since then, it's served and it's grown to over 160 full-time staff, and it's served public and private sectors kind of all over the world, working with development partners and funders to achieve their goals and also just to guide their approaches. So the Nature for Water facility is one of Pegasus's partnerships that has been formed and one of its endeavors. So in 2022, Pegasus, we partnered with TNC to form the Nature for Water facility. So it is a technical assistance facility. So in other words, we provide technical assistance to local partners. And it is primarily focused around building catchment investment programs or watershed investment programs. We see that there is a global water problem. Water security is under pressure. This is driven by population growth. It's driven by planning, climate change, land degradation. There's a lot of different things, pollution. All of these things contribute to the fact that there are a huge amount of people and a huge amount of cities that are affected by water security problems. And the consequence of this is that the consequence of this is multi-sectoral, it's long-term, it's very complex, and it requires a different approach to try and address. So really we are trying to shift the narrative a little bit and try to look at things more holistically. Effectively, we want to look at how investments in the water sector are done and shift those investments towards a holistic, long-term and nature-based solutions alongside the grey infrastructure solutions. So this is to ensure that the ecosystem services and ecosystems that support our grey infrastructure and other infrastructure and people, that they are supplied by sustainable water sources, that these can support communities that can thrive, and that the long-term impact on water security, climate mitigation or adaptation, biodiversity and livelihood can be supported by nature-based solutions in these catchments. We've seen this shift in recent years with the investment doubling within nature-based solutions and within green infrastructure. So we really try to shift this investment, and what the role that we play in this is we try to create bankable, long-lasting programs. So we will design, establish, empower watershed investment programs in different landscapes, and we do this by working hand in hand with local partners, and effectively wanting to do this also just to sustain those catchments as well as the grey infrastructure that those catchments support. So we work in watersheds to drive impact. We want to create scalable investment programs. So as I said, we typically work with a local partner as a technical assistance facility. We'll go into a catchment, we'll engage with the partners there, and we'll look to try and scale up what they are doing. We'll look to try and help them be more efficient in what they're doing or more targeted. And we'll look to also just try and, quantify the impacts of what they are planning to do or what they intend to do. So we design long-term investment programs with clear business cases, and these draw from different lessons learned through the projects that we've worked on. So what do we actually do? So in practice, we work across 3 different components. So program design. This helps to conceptualize, this helps to define local programs' visions, and we'll co-define those with the local partner and build them out. We'll look to do implementation support, where we will help local partners with their implementation plans, help them look at how they can source funding and how this can be done over the long term, and how they can translate their program into actual results on the ground. And we also do knowledge management. So not only do we take projects from feasibility through to implementation, we also look at building out knowledge products. We open source all of our learnings, and we have, for example, developed a how-to guide on watershed investment programs, which is then freely available in the public space. And there's also the Resilient Watersheds Toolbox as well, which is run through the Nature Conservancy. And essentially, we're just trying to increase the knowledge around nature-based solutions, increase the knowledge around what nature does and how it impacts on our catchments, on our water security, and on our infrastructure. And we're just trying to build a community around improving water security on a global scale. So we've worked over the last few years, we've worked across 57 different projects in more than 30 countries, and all at different stages of development. So some are like early stage pre-feasibility, looking at potential pathways to develop a watershed investment program, or feasibility, where we might look at building out a value proposition or business case for nature-based solutions in a catchment and see if this is a meaningful investment opportunity and it can return positive impacts, or implementation support, as discussed in the previous slide. So today I'll be talking about our work with the Lesotho role. As I said, this has included a design, so the design of a fund. It's included the assessment of nature-based solutions and the potential for nature-based solutions in the catchment, and it also included a carbon assessment. Something else we do as part of the implementation support program typically is developing impact dashboards. So these are both useful for outward-facing means, where our partners are then able to quantify the impacts that their work is having, either through calculation methods and scientifically approved methods, or through on-the-ground monitoring and evaluation, which can then feed into these programs. Additionally, it allows for management of implementation. So implementation partners, who's implementing where, what activities are being undertaken. And we will develop a dashboard like this that our local partner can then use to help run their watershed investment program or their catchment investment program. It's also really useful when it comes to fundraising or quantifying, what you've managed to achieve through your program. So that's just a little overview of Pegasus and of Nature for Water. So I'll get into a bit more detail now about what we've actually been doing in Lesotho and the work that we've been doing there and what we found. As we said in the beginning, we're looking at food and water security. I think it's important from our point of view just that, when we talk about water security, we're talking about the reliable availability of sufficient high quality water to support health, livelihoods, ecosystems, and production, whilst managing water-related risks to people, environments, and economies. And that's the grain state of the IUCN water security definition. Effectively, what we're saying is we want an acceptable amount of water, so not too much water as in a flood, and not too little water as in a drought. And we want water of a decent quality to be able to support livelihoods and support ecosystems and the catchments. So we've been partnering now with the Regeneration of Landscapes and Livelihoods project for the last 2 years and working closely with their project management unit. You'll probably see the acronym PMU on the screen at some point. And also then with the Ministry of Finance. So, Lesotho currently is grappling with severe and ongoing land degradation. If you are ever in a plane and you fly over Lesotho, just one look out the window will give you a very good indication of the difficulty that's being faced in the landscape there. This leads to loss of indigenous grasslands, ecosystems, degradation of wetlands, sedimentation in the waterways and dams, and subsequent decline in water quality and aquatic life. So in Lesotho, 66% of households rely on this degraded land, and there's an annual topsoil loss of 2% due to erosion. So this situation is very critical. One of our colleagues said that Lesotho's biggest export is in fact topsoil, not water. Obviously that's just a joke, but it really does highlight the intensity of this issue, to be losing 2% of your topsoil a year. Lesotho is referred to as the water tower of Southern Africa, and it generates 3.7% of its GDP from cross-border water transfers and electricity sales from hydropower. So water security efforts are really crucial to the country and to its economy. About 26% of the population is facing acute food insecurity. Last year, Lesotho announced a national state of emergency for food security, and this is also just driven by water availability as El Nino cycles affected them last year. 70% of households also rely partially or fully on agriculture for their income and for their food security. Nearly half of the country's workforce is employed in the agricultural sector, but agriculture obviously exerts significant pressure on freshwater resources and on the landscapes. And this is a significant issue in an arid and semi-arid region like Lesotho, where you've got a growing population and increasing competition for scarce water resources, and it creates additional complexity. So we've been working with the ROLL project to try and develop community-driven partnerships among stakeholders, and trying to reduce the risk of this project being a temporary project that does a little bit of good work and then slowly fades away into non-existence. Another analysis that we've done, and we've done some soil analysis as part of our hydrological modeling. So land degradation, it's got profound implications for water security. The soil erosion contributes to sedimentation in water bodies. It reduces availability of clean water for human consumption, irrigation, and livestock. It reduces the available storage capacity of dams. And in many rural areas, communities, they rely on direct abstractions from the river and streams. So, these water sources and the quality of them are really essential. It's what we refer to as a short value chain. So effectively, there's no buffer between the communities and the water source. If you talk about people who rely on water from Lesotho downstream, like in the Vaal system, that's been through a large dam where there is buffer, and if the river doesn't run for a month, the dam's probably still got water in it. It's been through a water treatment plant. So yes, your costs maybe were higher than they needed to be with sediment loads, but the water can still be treated. So really the short value chain is really important, and it highlights the interdependence between food and water security, as well as the need to look at things holistically and try and address these challenges holistically to safeguard the country's future. We've undertaken various assessments as part of our scientific analysis and looked at what plant species there are and what state the grasslands are in. There's a fair bit of invasive plants as well, and also look at what land uses are currently underway and how the land is being used, what the agricultural practices are, what the livestock practices are, and what are the grazing conditions within the country. And I'm sure of interest to the SANCOLD community. Our team was at the Metlong Dam last week. The Metlong Dam, the bottom outlet of the Metlong Dam is no longer accessible. It has in fact silted up to the bottom outlet level. This dam was only completed in 2015, I believe. So the fact that they've now lost one of their outlets, yes, they do have multiple outlets, and yes, they do expect sedimentation to happen over time. This is a risk factor that is known, but the rate at which it is silted up is quite significant. So already they've lost one outlet. I mean, the picture on the right, you might not be able to say there's a little horse, a white horse standing in the water. We've been told that that was in fact quite deep, not too long ago. So this is up at the headwaters. So the dam is silting up quite a lot. There is a lot of degradation in the catchment. Again, if you fly over it, you can see it quite clearly, and this just poses a significant threat for the country. This is Maseru's primary water supply. Last year, during that food and water security, during the food state of emergency, the Metlong Dam wasn't able to supply to some communities. So this is a significant problem for the country. Okay, so if we look at Lesotho on a whole, this is a map of Lesotho. There are 3 primary catchments within the country. This is the Senku catchment, and this is the Magaleng catchment, and this is the Mohokari catchment, which is a shared catchment with South Africa. So we looked at, and then you've got big infrastructure sets, big LHDA dams, and then also local dams. There's obviously transfers that go out to South Africa and hydropower as well. And there's a feasibility study that's been done for transfer out to Botswana as well. So the Magaleng catchment potentially could be supplying water into Botswana. And the ROLL project, so the Regeneration of Landscapes and Livelihoods project, has 11 focused sub-catchments within Lesotho. There are other projects that are doing integrated catchment management, such as Ranoka. They are also working in other catchments, and effectively some of the catchments are shared as well. But we went through a process of trying to identify which catchments would be most representative of the different conditions in the country. So we wanted to get an understanding of all of the different scenarios that might be experienced in the country and the different uses that are being experienced within the catchments. And we went through a lengthy stakeholder engagement process here to identify which catchments would be best suited for the purposes of building a business case, building a value proposition for nature-based solutions. And ultimately, we got down to three preferential catchments. And the catchments are all different, and maybe I'll talk to them in a little while. But effectively, we got ones that are representative and ones which had decent data, because if you want to do a hydrological model properly, it is always helpful to have a decent source of data. And with existing studies that are going on and analyses that are going on, this is all hot topic for Lesotho at the moment, and the degradation is obviously well noted within there. What we see in yellow on this picture is degraded grassland. With wool and mohair being quite a significant industry within the country, the grasslands are very important for the country. You've got quite a lot of exotic forests, so alien invasives, and you've also got a lot of gullies that are formed, and gullies and bare surfaces as well. And I mean, as I'm sure most of you will be well versed, the bare surfaces really increase the erosion potential. So if you look at a bare surface compared to a grassland, on a grassland, you're going to get better infiltration, you're going to get slower runoff, you're going to get better value for your crops and for your livestock also to feed on. There's more food available versus a bare surface where your rainfall runs off directly, typically at higher velocities. There's less infiltration, so therefore there's more rainfall running off. That increase in amount of rainfall runoff, as well as increase in velocity and the exposed soils, means that you've got higher erosion, and that leads to gully formation and gully expansion as well. So in the work that we do, looking at things on a catchment level, taking a holistic view on implementing catchment level investment programs and trying to implement catchment programs that are sustainable over the long term, we found that there really are 5 key components which help to enable these programs to be successful over the long term. And these are things that we think about when we look at developing programs with local partners, and we try to address each of these different components with our local partners and see where we can support them. So I'll start with the delivery model, and effectively what I'm talking about here is what is the approach to actually implementing on the ground interventions in the catchment. So we'll go through how we select interventions and how we select what interventions to do and the worthwhileness of those interventions. But once you have an intervention, how are you actually going to get it onto the ground? Who are you going to partner with to actually implement? How are you going to fund it? How are those funds going to flow? Are you able to actually disperse funds? Are you able to disperse resources? Maybe they need to be, maybe you need to provide technical assistance and training as opposed to monetary assistance or resources assistance. And what guidance do you need to help support that? So in Lesotho, they are looking to develop and implement these nature-based solution programs through local communities. A lot of the programs we've tried to, get to the point where the programs are implementable by local communities. So a lot of them involve changing of practices, changing of how they are interacting and engaging with the land. And in order to do this, and in order to enable the management of this implementation across the community, there are community coalitions that are being formed. So we're working with an NGO called Sentibale and AvoVision, AvoVision is a South African NGO and Sentibale is a Lesotho one. And they are forming these coalition facilities, and they are training and enabling the different community leaders to be able to run these facilities and then implement the nature-based solutions appropriate for their catchments. The role PMU, so that's the role project management unit. So that's the leadership component of the role team, as well as their field officers. They provide oversight, they provide training, they provide guidance, and the field officers are very knowledgeable, and they are located within the catchment, so they are interacting with the communities continually, and they're a key component in actually delivering nature-based solutions on the ground and getting these implemented. And then funding. So how do we actually fund it? Who's going to support this? Who's going to employ those, pay for those field officers to be employed? Who's going to pay for resources that are required? And that's sourced from the fund. So I'll talk more about the fund in a little while, but effectively there is a capitalized fund that sits within the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. And through the development of application forms and development of catchment investment programs or natural resource management plans, the different community coalitions can apply to the fund for support. So that support could come in the form of training, could come in the support in the form of financial resources for a particular implementation objective, or it could come in the form of just other resources, like tools or seedlings. There's an operations manual that's for the fund, and there's eligibility criteria to guide what they need to meet in order for the funds to go towards implementation objectives that support the overall objective of the role project. The governance is really important, particularly the decision-making ability and protocol that need to be put in place. So there is institutional oversight in this case. The existing fund is housed within the government of Lesotho, within the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. And that fund then has management structures. It has an operational manual, it has a fund design, it has eligibility criteria for the implementation, and that then allows for effective decision making. So the fund currently sits as a sinking fund, and meaning it can be drawn down for implementation. But then there's consideration about how does this fund look in the long term, and that's work that we're currently doing and will be doing going forward with the ministry. Because there are other funds as well in Lesotho, and we want them to, all work in collaboratively and to support each other. So the fund itself, that provides financing for landscape regeneration interventions. And as I've said, the landscape interventions are very much aligned with interventions that improve water security. So we're looking to support both of those things through the implementation objectives of the fund. The fund has been capitalized by IFAD, so it is sitting with funds. And the intention is for this fund to support these local communities, but to do that over the long term. So as per the definition of a project, the role project is a temporary endeavor. All projects are temporary endeavors. So the role project has 8-year program, and that looks to establish the fund as part of that, as well as establish the community coalitions as part of that, establish the implementation procedures and the delivery models. And effectively, the fund is then expected to outlive the project. So the fund is expected to continue into perpetuity. So a lot of what we will be trying to do in future is actually trying to find ways in which to catalyze investments into this fund, so that it can be financed over the long term, and then that funding can then support the implementation of the nature-based solutions for the landscape regeneration and for the water security over the long term. So it's currently got an 8-year funding commitment, but we're now looking longer term than that. I mean, it might sound basic to say leadership, but really it's one of the biggest enabling conditions that we've seen in our work. Having a local champion who is committed, who will be lying in bed at night thinking about all the problems they need to solve in their catchment and ways in which to do that, is really invaluable. And you need local champions to exist on multiple levels. So you need them in the communities, you need them in the governance structures, you need them in the governments and the ministries, you need them in the implementation partners. So really establishing a cohort of leaders and champions who are willing to drive the program, who believe in what it's trying to achieve, is really critical to actually achieving success. And I think this and the other topics as well that I'll be covering, it really is consistent with most of projects and most of the implementation that we'll be trying to do as engineers or as in catchment rehabilitation work, as well as further afield. So as I mentioned, we're looking for the fund to be supported over the long term, to have a sustainable financing source. In the short term, the fund has funding, but the long-term success of funding is really built around how do people see the benefits being derived from this fund. So we're working towards this value proposition, and I'll go into more details on that. But effectively, we're looking to see, is it viable for people to invest in the fund, and does that investment leverage, is it leverageable? So does that investment cause a greater value to be generated as a result of it? So what we typically see is in the short term, higher costs and high implementation costs, but it's really important to have that long-term funding to support the fund over the long term and support the implementation over the long term. Otherwise, you actually lose those benefits. And then lastly, justification and a technical case. So, and that's, again, this is an area where we work often, particularly in our feasibility studies. But in order for there to be a justification, there needs to be a need. So is there a need? Is there a challenge that is being faced that needs to be addressed and that can be addressed? And can you build a technical case that showcases how that can be addressed and showcase that there are benefits in addressing it? So we present a value proposition, and that document, it presents the value case for a catchment level investment plan through collective action. And we then compare the costs and benefits of implementation to justify, is it worthwhile to actually undertake this investment? So, I've gone through each of these individually, but as you probably would have seen some commonalities across them. They all really need to work together for a program to be successful on a catchment level and for a holistic program to be successful. All right, so I'll go into a bit more about a value proposition and what we mean by that, and why we do it, and then I'll go through actually how we've done it for Lesotho for the ROL project. So effectively, we are undertaking an analysis that identifies what are the costs of undertaking an intervention program, and what are the benefits of doing that, and we're expressing this in monetary terms. So while we as technical people often are very happy to see a water quantity benefit or a yield benefit or a reduction in sediment load and understand what that means, we've noticed that it doesn't often drive the decision maker's hands. So we really want to express things in monetary terms because that's often what decisions are made on. And to do that, we then need to value the benefits that are derived from the catchments and from the programs that we're implementing. So we want to know, for every dollar invested, how much value is generated. So we look at what are the nature-based solutions options and how can they be implemented, and what are the costs of implementing that program. And then by looking at those costs and the program and what options there are and what impact they have, we can then also prioritize the different nature-based solutions. We want to look at what is the monetary value of the changes in ecosystem services flows. So what I mean by that is, if we see a reduction in water availability, what does that cost? So if we see a reduction in a business as usual situation versus an implementation program, the difference between that, we can see that there's a benefit of implementing our program, and we want to understand what is the value of that benefit. We want to therefore do scientific analyses to understand those ecosystem services, when they show up and how they show up. And then we want to compare, what are the different options here? Is a holistic nature-based solution program beneficial? Are there other options that we could implement that are cheaper or achieve the same thing? So we will often do a cost effectiveness analysis where we look at two different options next to each other and assess them and see which is better. And then who benefits? So importantly for our long-term financial sustainability of the projects, we want to know who's actually going to benefit from the project, and would they therefore be willing to fund the project because the benefit is significant enough for them, and what co-benefits can it generate. So not all benefits are easy or able to be quantified, and not all benefits which are quantifiable are easy to value. So we actually will often categorize benefits as a co-benefit, and then it's still important, it's still a benefit, but it's a hard thing to put a value to. So why do we do this? Why do we build these value propositions? Why do we produce this report? It's to show the value of the long-term investment program, and it's to show the value within the existing structures. Is to demonstrate the case for sustainable funding mechanism. In this case, that's the fund, the ROF, the Regeneration of Opportunities Fund, and to drive long-term value. And it's also to highlight the different and multi-dimensional benefits of nature-based solutions at scale and implementing those at scale, and the risks of not doing anything. There's always an option to not spend any money and not invest in a catchment, but there of course are implications and outcomes as a result of that. So what do we cover typically within a value proposition assessment? We'll cover what nature-based solutions are most applicable and how to implement them. What are the costs with implementing those? We'll quantify the benefits of implementation using scientific methods. We'll then look at how we value those benefits. And then we'll do financial and economic modeling over a 30-year period typically to assess what are the impacts of implementation and how do the costs compare to the benefits gained. And then we look forward. We look at how these can then be implemented. We look at what use the report or the value proposition will have in order to motivate funding and motivate implementation in the catchments, and then how best to implement the catchment investment programs, giving consideration to the different factors and enabling factors that I discussed just now. So in Lesotho, we specifically focused on 3 sub-catchments. Their numbers, sub-catchment 1 and 3 is Bute, and that's upstream of the Katsi Dam, and it's in the Senku catchment. Then the Berea catchment, Potasiane River, that feeds into the Caledon just above Maseru. And then the Kuting catchment. And then particularly of interest in the Kuting catchment is that this holds the Letsing Laletsi Ramsar site. It's a wetland, a very quite a pristine wetland, but it's under threat. There's grazing happening, encroaching on the wetland, and there's decreasing water levels as well. So we look, and I'm not expecting you to read this all. We look across a range of different nature-based solutions. We consider a wide range, ultimately to get to those which we think are most suitable and most impactful within the 3 catchments. As those 3 catchments, they're all very different. Some are highly populated. The one has major infrastructure in the form of the Katsi Dam. And then the Letsing Laletsi is very, very low population, but has high ecological value, and also has high potential for ecotourism as well. So ultimately, we got down to 3 nature-based solutions that would be implemented within the different catchments: agricultural best management practices, rangeland best management practices, and then riparian wetland restoration. And we then go through a process of costing these different interventions and seeing what they would cost to implement. And in doing so, we also work out a delivery model in terms of how they can be implemented and what it would take to implement them. We look at these particular ones because they assist with soil erosion and improvement of water quality. They help with water quantity, about when the water shows up, flood reduction, as well as increase in base flows due to the infiltration increase as a result of improved grassland conditions. They also help to address landscape degradation. And then also you've got a decline in grazing resource, loss of grasslands, loss of woody species for foraging. And really they look at the combination of enhancing water security, ecosystem health, as well as sustainable land use. And in turn, that then supports livelihoods and the regeneration of the landscapes. So we see different examples across the country of where these have been implemented and where they hadn't been implemented successfully or appropriately, and the impacts of that. The rangelands particularly, there's a large amount of area that you see on the left here where you've got almost no grass cover, and you've got this woody species that is encroaching, and it's an indigenous species, I believe, but it's invasive and it's non-palatable. And we look at the rangeland best management practices, rotational grazing structures, how you use the grass, and how you graze the grass to really help improve soil health and help improve grassland condition. And then we've got riparian wetland restoration. So we see a lot of these dongas across the country. I mean, a lot of them are, like some of them are 20 meters deep. You can't really do much about it. However, you can stop that donga spreading. You can stop it being, the continual erosion upstream through bund walls or through other means of vegetation as well. So really looking at trying to avoid the continued degradation, slow down the water in some areas, as well as protect the wetlands, establish buffers for the riparian zones, and look after the catchments better, effectively. And really this is done over a very large area. So, across the sub-catchments, we have a large area of a large number of hectares. I'm not going to just go, the numbers are in the thousands and quite a few of them. So there's quite a lot of work to do. It's a big implementation to undertake. It's a big thing to coordinate, and that's why you need collective action for these initiatives, and that's why you need multiple different implementation partners to support. And that's also why you look to do it through the local communities who are living off the land and living in the land. What we typically see with nature-based solutions is this high upfront cost. So you've got high initiation, you've got training, you've got resources, you've got equipment, and that's a lot of cost that happens in the first few years. With the alien invasive plants, for example, you typically see this, extending for a couple of years beyond that. And then you've got a long-term maintenance cost. And if you think about actually, what that means, the initial cost, although it's much higher and you need a lot of money up front, the maintenance cost actually makes up the majority of the overall cost of the projects. And the reason for developing these programs and developing governance structures and institutionalizing the program and developing a fund and sustainable financing sources is really to support this long-term maintenance. We see lots of projects that come and go in a few years, and they do good implementation and they do a great job, but then the project ends, the funding runs out, and there's no long-term maintenance, and actually the benefits of those projects are not really felt over the longer term. So it's really important to set these programs up for success, to enable them to actually be active over the long term. This is a typical schematic that we might draw for a catchment. So this is the Katsi Dam catchment. What it'll show you is all the different role players in the catchment. It'll show you where there's high population, where there's different land use types, and what that land use is. It also shows what are some of the what are some of the challenges that are being felt in those lands. So, for example, you might see increase in cropland, bare surfaces, and gullies. You might see loss of grassland, increase in shrubland, which is that non-palatable shrub I was talking about just now. And it helps us schematically just see what the catchment looks like, what the catchment's problems are, and where those problems exist, as well as then identifying, who the different role players are in those catchments, who plays a meaningful role in how that catchment is managed, who would be able to support potentially, who is affected by the flow of ecosystem services through the catchment. And then we've got included our different interventions and where those interventions might be. So we've got check dams, riparian restoration, rangeland-based management practices, clearing of invasive alien tree species. And all in all, this is just a means to communicate, the different components and the complexity that exists within the catchment, but in a simpler term. And also a way to link the different beneficiaries of the ecosystem services to the catchment and show the flow of ecosystem services between. It's really important if we think about development of dam infrastructure, for example, to consider the fact that that dam doesn't stand in isolation. It's 100% reliant on the catchment that feeds it. So we can't distinguish the two. They're not two separate things. They're completely interreliant. So our approach to quantifying the benefits of the implementation. So firstly, we'll do a scientific quantification of this. So in this case, we use the SWOT model, and we did hydrological modeling, and we did sediment modeling to understand what, firstly, under a baseline scenario, what is the status quo in the catchments? What is the current degradation rate? So we used remote sensing and available aerial imagery to assess gully expansion, to inspect the increasing rate of degradation of grasslands, so decreasing quality grasslands. And all of these things, we mapped all of those different components so that you get an understanding of what is the current trend. So the baseline scenario is a point scenario, so that will be, in present day terms, what are the current conditions of the catchment? What is the sediment load in the rivers? What is the erosion potential and degradation on the landscapes? What are the hydrological flows across the year? And that's effectively that's our baseline. Then we look at two different future scenarios. So we know that we don't live in a static environment. We live in a changing and dynamic environment. So we cannot assume that the baseline scenario will be, as it is for forever. As we've seen from the analyses, there are trends and there are degradation trends that indicate that the landscapes won't, in fact, stay the same. They will, in fact, degrade under current conditions. So we then project those trends 30 years into the future, and we project what the likely future would be of land cover, of the management conditions, of the water flows. So we'll model that then through SWOT under a future land cover or future land use condition, and assess now what is our current state in the future. What is our state in the future in 30 years time under a business as usual situation. Then we will look at an intervention scenario. So we'll look at a realistic uptake of the different nature-based solutions that we've recommended, and a realistic scenario of how much impact those nature-based solutions could have on, for example, reducing degradation or re-establishing or rehabilitating grasslands, of improving wetland health and the conditions and functions that those wetlands offer. And then we'll project that into the future as well. And effectively what our analyses will then do is we'll compare those two future scenarios, an intervention scenario versus a business as usual scenario. And the difference between those two, that gives us an indication in 30 years time of what the magnitude of the benefits would be, but as a result of implementing the nature-based solutions program. So that's then the outcome of our scientific analysis, and we then quantify what we can quantify through that process. So on the left here, the bar chart, this gives us an indication of what the change has been over the last 7 years up to present day. And it shows, for example, big decreases in cropland. It shows, for example, increases in tree species, and these are alien invasive trees. We see decreases in shrubland as well. And basically, this is an indication of, what is the change and what are the trends that we see existing on the landscape. Then at the top, this is our business as usual scenario for the Katse Dam catchment. So the reds and the reds are really indicating what degraded grasslands will be there. And if we compare that then to an implementation scenario, which is the lower picture, we see then improvements in grasslands or grasslands of good health as a result of the different programs being implemented. So basically, you sit with a choice. You sit at an inflection point. So either there's a choice to continue under a business as usual scenario, or there's a choice to do implementation, which comes at a cost, but then also has ecosystem services benefits that can be generated from the implementation. We then look at what benefits to those, what are the knock-on benefits of those. So for example, if you improve the condition of grasslands, you can then carry more livestock on those grasslands sustainably. So yes, there might be an impact in the short term under the sense, if you think about the fact that currently these grasslands are overgrazed, so there needs to be some addressing of that overgrazing in the short term. But in the long term, you then can carry more because if you carry on in the current trends, you won't be able to carry many livestock on those rangelands at all. And then we then quantify how much can you sustainably carry on the different grasslands. There's also disaster risk mitigation. So in the Berea district, there are a lot of people, and we see that actually through rehabilitation of the catchment, you see a decrease in your flood events. So there's attenuation across the catchment. So for an example, a 1 in 100 year flood actually becomes the equivalent of about a 1 in 65 year flood event. A 1 in 50 year event becomes the equivalent of a 1 in 35 year event in terms of likelihood of occurring. So there's a decrease in the flood extents. And we were fortunate in this case that there have been recent floods, so there have been studies done on that. And then there's biodiversity. So biodiversity is very hard to quantify. And this is something that we see commonly across our different projects. So, water, we can model and we can quantify the water flows and how they show up. Sediment transport, we can model and we can quantify those flows. We could, as I said now, we can quantify what the carrying capacity is of the landscape for the animals and for livestock. But biodiversity is a little bit harder. So we can then use this as a co-benefit. So different funder groups or different beneficiaries are interested in different components. So we do our best to actually communicate how much biodiversity improvements there might be and how that is linked into the catchments. But that doesn't, it adds value to a value proposition. However, these are not often valued in terms of monetary terms unless you can do a detailed ecotourism or process or some other processes, but they typically are more detailed and a bit harder to do. So if I collectively sort of summarize the outputs we get from the scientific analysis, in the catchments we see avoided loss of stream flow between the two future scenarios. We see a significant storage saving of 53 million cubic meters over 30 years in the Katse Dam. There's a loss of productive cropland under business as usual. So we see avoided loss of that under implementation, and avoided loss of grasslands and rehabilitation of grasslands and flood reduction as well. And then similarly across the other two catchments, particularly for catchment 52 Kuteng district, there's the Letsing Letsi, which is the wetland, and it is a Ramsar site. So it is really important from a biodiversity point of view. So actually maintaining those flows and maintaining those base flows into that catchment is really important. Okay, so if I summarize, we're seeing increased stream flow and water availability. We're seeing increased available dam storage under the implementation, increase in available cropland, increase in available grassland for livestock and grazing, and also for catchment health, and then also decreased risk of flood damage. So as I was saying, some of the benefits are you're able to sort of assign a monetary value to this, and others not. So we typically categorize our benefits into monetized benefits, benefits we can quantify, but they are not monetized. So it's still worth saying, for example, that there's a 10% increase in the base flows, but to actually determine how much money that's worth and who that is worth money to is very difficult unless you've got a particular offtake that you can then compare it to. So if I look at our quantified benefits, we look at these across water security, across food security, and across livelihood security. So under water security, we're seeing the avoided loss of dam storage, seeing the avoided loss of stream flow. Under food security, avoided loss of cropland and improved sustainable carrying capacity of the rangelands. We've got disaster risk reduction and job opportunities that are created on the livelihood side as well. We then go through a process of actually valuing these. So, for example, on the avoided loss of dam storage, we would then put a value to that by saying, okay, what is the capital cost to replace that lost storage? So the dam costs X amount to build and it has a certain amount of storage. So if you can prevent the loss of that storage, what is that worth? Or if you had to replace that storage through another means, what would that cost? Avoided loss of cropland, we will determine, what is the value of those crops that can be planted and sold, and what are the livelihoods then that are affected by that. Similarly with grasslands, what is the carrying capacity of that land and the value of the livestock that it can carry. The value of the disaster risk mitigation. So we've got reduced flood peak exposure or reduced flood risk, and there's an average annual cost that can be applied to that as well, based on historical evidence of impacts and value that the costs that the floods have incurred. And then you've got employment creation. So effectively, how much value is actually generated by the different people in the communities as a result of working within the project and supporting it. So that it falls under both as a cost and as a benefit, effectively. Okay, so we've got multiple different costs that are then required to undertake this program. So as you said, nothing comes without a cost. So there are programmatic costs and non-programmatic costs. Programmatic refer to actual implementation on the ground. So that would be training, building of exclusion zones, removal of alien invasive plants, restoration activities, grassland, conservation, agriculture. So it is, these are all the implementation related components. And then you've got non-programmatic costs because you have a fund and you have people who have to be employed, and they might need an HR, or they might need, a vehicle, or they might need, might need other support or an office. You also have monitoring and evaluation costs. So, we want to showcase the impacts that the program's having. So you need to then evaluate that and actually monitor it effectively. And then we've got our benefits. So across our 3 different subcatchments, we see our particular benefits being created under livestock. So carrying capacity of livestock. We know that rangeland, we know that wool and mohair is a significant industry for Lesotho, and that's sort of built in culturally to their practices, having the livestock. We also see significant impact from and benefit from job creation. A lot of these communities are short of work, and actually informing these community coalitions, you then enable this. And then we also see, the benefits from the flood damage, particularly in subcatchment 13 and 60 and subcatchment 1 and 3. And then dam storage, which is the purple one on the right. That is the Katsi Dam and the potential loss of 54 million cubic meters of storage there. As I mentioned in the beginning, we will then take all of these figures and put them into a financial and economic model. So we will model the costs, we'll model the benefits about when they show up, how they show up, and to what quantity they show up. Over a 30-year period, we'll then discount this using social discount rates back to present day terms, and then express how the two compare against each other in present day terms. So in this case, we see a net present value. So in other words, the total benefit minus the total cost in present day terms. We see a net present value of 271 million Maloti or Lesotho Loti, which is equivalent to rands. And we also see that the benefit cost ratio is 1.7 to 1. So in other words, for every 1 rand or 1 Loti that is invested in this program, it realizes a benefit value of 1.7. And effectively, these financial metrics are what is really useful for decision makers to justify implementation, to justify investment into the fund, to support the initiative. And we see that this carries a lot more weight with decision makers than just the scientific outputs and just the quantification of the benefits. So effectively what we've done here is we've valued those ecosystem services and we've compared that against the cost of achieving them. So, I mean, lastly here, and this will be my last slide, but effectively the value proposition and the point of it is to make a case. So we want to make a case for investment in the catchment. We want to make a case and communicate that case for why is it worthwhile to focus on holistic catchment investment and not point source solutions or not just leaving the catchment to degrade. I do feel like that you reach an inflection point where you can either do this implementation or you can carry on business as usual. But I think this showcases why it's important to actually make the decision and make the investment. So we see those benefits across water security. We see the reduction in soil erosion. We see groundwater recharge increase. We see maintained stream flows. And that then comes at a value as well as just a benefit for local communities. So, I mean, your short communities that live on a short value chain, you know, we haven't derived a value for that. However, there's significant benefit for them and significant consequences if the water quality decreases. So looking at food security, we see through improved soil health, improved agricultural practices and livestock practices that there's agricultural productivity improvements and cropland, avoided cropland loss as well, and livestock, significant livestock value that can then be carried sustainably. And that sustainably is really important because under current conditions, it's not really done sustainably. So there are long-term impacts that will be felt and are already being felt. And we see livelihood security benefits. So we see a reduction in flood risks. We see part-time job creation, and we see significant income going into the communities and into these rural communities who really are in need. So the value proposition really supports the fund. So ultimately what we're looking at is trying to find ways in which to support that fund over the long term, identifying beneficiaries who benefit from the ecosystem services that flow through the catchment, particularly through the water, food and livelihood impacts that the nature-based solution would have on the catchment. And then additionally, you've got climate and biodiversity gains. So we've got carbon offsets as a result of improved soil organic carbon retention within the grasslands, as well as improved biodiversity, wetland protection, riparian zone protection, healthier grasslands, healthier habitats, better water quality. And then, you know, these things also then they strengthen the case. So they're not necessarily valued from a financial point of view, but they do then strengthen and support the case for looking at things on a holistic view. And really, that's a big difference between a lot of the different interventions. They don't all bring about these additional benefits. So you might find that an intervention can achieve a similar output in terms of water availability, but it doesn't come with a biodiversity gain as well. And that's why it's important for us to include these components in the value proposition, because they make the holistic case for undertaking nature-based solutions in the catchments. Right, thank you very much, everyone. And yeah, very happy to take questions. I haven't seen the chat, so I don't know if there are any in there, but I will stop sharing. And yeah, I'll hand over to Ashley to coordinate.
Thank you, Guy. We really appreciate it. I'll comment just now a bit further. We have a question in the chat. So if anyone else would like to ask a question, you can raise your hands while I'm reading the questions from the chat, or you can just continue with the discussion in the chat as well. So the question from Leila is, do you have a stakeholder engagement meeting with communities within each catchment area that you have created? And then the second part is, has large dams built in Lesotho been a factor that has affected the surrounding ecosystem and degradation of the grasslands and wetlands, etc.?
Great, thanks. Thanks for those. Those are great questions. So on the first one, on the stakeholder engagement, so a really important way in which we work is that we partner with local partners. So what we find is that local partners who've been working in catchments and have built up trust and have built up approaches to work with local communities and alongside local communities are really important from a supporting long-term initiatives and supporting collective action in those catchments. So yes, we have had quite extensive stakeholder engagement meetings and that's covered quite a few different role players. So we've had with ministries, with government bodies, with the project bodies, with the service providers who support the project, as well as then into local communities. But the local community engagement is primarily driven by Sentebale and the project field officers. And it's really important to consider, stakeholder fatigue in these situations. Like these Lesotho communities, they see different groups coming in and out of there all the time. So to just be another group that comes in and out of there is not particularly helpful. So really, we want to be working through our local partners who are based in Lesotho and who are supporting those local communities on a long-term basis. And we want to enable them to be able to do that. Ultimately, we won't be involved over the long term. Ultimately, we want to set up a program that can self-sustain, and we want to set up local partners who can do that. So I think that's a really important component of our work and approach to our work. Then on the large dams, so I think we all know, being in the dams and water community, that there are significant and extensive dams that have been built in Lesotho. We know that there's really good water resources that come out of Lesotho. I would say your question, it's actually the other way around, in the sense that the degraded landscapes and the degraded grasslands and degraded wetlands, those actually affect the dams. They affect how much storage those dams can carry. They affect the quality of the water that's going into those dams. Metlong's a really good example of that. There's another dam, Mafeteng, which is also a Wasco dam, which Wasco is the Lesotho water utility. That dam has almost completely silted up, and they're currently tendering to dredge it. I think it's a 17-meter high dam, and I think it's only about 30 years old. So there's significant catchment degradation. It has significant impacts on the infrastructure, and I think importantly, the dredging of the dam is quite a good sort of comparison point for them, because they're facing the same issue in Metlong Dam and with the Metlong catchment. They can look at what is the cost of dredging that dam versus what is the cost of actually undertaking a catchment-wide initiative to improve how the landscapes are managed and what the condition of their ecosystems are in those catchments. We don't assume ever, obviously, that the sedimentation will stop. We know that is a reality with dams. Part of ecosystem flows indicates that there will be sediment transport. Erosion is a very natural process. However, unsustainable land use practices enhance that. They really accelerate it, and the need to address that really does exist.
All right, thank you. If there's anyone else, you can raise your hand. We'll wait a few seconds.
Yeah, I think the one thing that those large dams have done is there's been a lot of sort of people relocation. So I know LHDA have got quite a few programs that then try to address that. But the relocation of people then potentially puts more pressure on some of the natural resources as well. So you might find concentration of people, which then leads to an additional level of degradation or pressure on the landscape.
All right. Alan, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Thank you for raising your hand.
Thanks, Ashley. Thanks, Guy. That was can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Excellent.
I'll just put the my sound up. Guy, in countries to the north of us, if you take it was then Rhodesia, became Zimbabwe, but if you go back, I used to work for the Ministry of Water Development there. And one of our colleague departments, now in the Department of Agriculture, they had agricultural extension officers, and they were big sections of that department. And for many, many decades, they did a lot of work, not just a lot of work in the field on catchment, not, you can call it repair of catchments. It was getting to the source of erosion, getting to the source of the problem. And then also here in South Africa, the Department of Agriculture, those who weren't involved with irrigation, they were involved with those soil retention structures, whether they were gabion type structures or there were even buttress arch structures. And we had those up north, and they were in the Free State. I've seen quite a lot on some of they silted up. What's happened over the decades in Lesotho, or was there ever a program? And then I've noticed in South Africa, perhaps everything's come to a bit of a stop or a dead end. Can you comment?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really comment explicitly, Alan, but I think there are quite a few. When we look around the catchments, and we've gone around a few of the catchments, we do see signs of these interventions that have been undertaken. So upstream of Metlong Dam, for example, there are quite a few areas where structures have been put in place to prevent the soil to catch soil, effectively the catch pits or check dams that have been built. But these things also require maintenance. So we'll see a check dam that is built and has been done so effectively, but it's completely silted up now. So the silt that comes down the river just flows straight over it now. It actually needs to be maintained and cleared out again so that it can continue to function. So yes, it's done its job, but it's there's now another job that needs to be done in order to maintain it. And we see that a lot with these programs where there's good interventions done, there's good intentions, they're good projects, but they are temporary in nature, and there's no sustainable financing structure to support the long-term implementation or long-term activities of that project or program. Government often will supply that sort of program, and I think in South Africa we've had that historically, as you said. I mean, it's interesting to hear about Zimbabwe as well. I don't know if there's been a formal program, but I think definitely you've got field officers in these catchments for the Roll project, and the field officers are actually they're very strong technically, and they've got a very good understanding of the landscape. So they are working with the local communities, and I think they do a good job, but it's in quite a constrained environment. There's not a lot of funding for them. There's limited implementation going on.
Thanks very much.
Sure.
All right, thank you. I don't see any more hands up, so I'm going to end the question and answer session. Thank you very much, Guy, for such a thought-provoking and insightful presentation. You've definitely given us a deeper understanding of the challenges facing Lesotho with the water and food systems. It's also good to see some practical examples and how innovation and collaboration and the emphasis on resilient solutions can make a real difference. I also want to thank our audience for joining today and for some of the questions and contributions. We hope that you found the session valuable, and we encourage you to take these ideas back to your own work and context. Just before we close, I would like to take a moment to remind you of some exciting opportunities within SANCOLD to continue your professional growth and engagement. So by becoming a member, you join a recognized professional community and automatically earn CPD points for being part of a voluntary association, which is recognized by EXA. It is also a key requirement for professional registration. So simply visit our website, click on the membership button, and follow the steps to join. You can also keep in touch with us through the LinkedIn page for updates and opportunities. I would also like to remind you of our annual conference taking place from 5 to 6 November at the Indaba Hotel in Johannesburg. It's going to bring together professionals from South Africa, Africa, and the broader SANCOLD community for 2 days of knowledge sharing and networking. And this year we are proud to host the SANCOLD hydropower course taking place from 3 to 4 November in Pretoria. Oh, it's also at the Indaba, sorry. And a 2-day program designed to introduce the fundamentals of hydropower engineering taught by leading experts. We encourage you to get involved, attend, and to make the most of these opportunities to grow and contribute in our industry. So on behalf of SANCOLD YPF, I would like to thank you once again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ashley. Thanks very much, everyone.